How's it going today, guys? This is Tanner with Woodgrain. We're gonna create yet another molding accent wall here. Today we're calling this our modern honeycomb. So essentially the pattern is a honeycomb type shape. We're gonna be repeating over and over on the wall. Pretty unique. It's definitely a lot more cuts. It's not necessarily super challenging in the fact that you can kind of create your template and create that cut over and over once you determine what that's going to be. So there's 5 specific steps in creating this look. First is the planning stage. So you want to make sure you're planning, draw out your plans, find out the angles, get an idea of the visual look and feel you're trying to get for the room. You can even decide the paint if you have an idea on that. This will help the project come together really smooth and not be on a whim. During the planning stage, I always recommend to draw things out, have a general idea of how things are going to line up. Decide what molding profiles you're going to use. We use 2 different molding profiles for this specific wall. There's a number of different molding profiles you could substitute for what we used, but really excited how this one came out. Love the look. Second is measuring. So we measured obviously the length and width, but then we had to do some measurements to determine what the size of our honeycomb pattern was going to be. So you can determine that. You can modify what we've done specifically. Every wall is going to vary and differ, but we want it to be a little bit bigger and bolder. You can go smaller as well. Third, installation. So quick tip on the installation stage, make sure that you're cutting your consistent strips out as a pattern. So create your pattern, your mold, and just cut and keep that consistent so you're not having to measure every single one. We ended up cutting all of our wood at once and coming in and installing it. It was a lot easier than just cutting piece by piece. The other thing I would say on the installation stage, use a level to make sure things are lining up properly and they are straight. Use a tape measure as well. So those 2 key pieces for your installation are what's going to make this thing come out and looking correct. Some quick insights. There's a lot of joints coming together. You're going to want to make sure that you spend a lot of time sanding and using wood putty and caulking on these seams to get that to look really finished. And if you don't, it's just going to look like trim on the wall. This looks like it's built in, looks custom, looks really pretty. But I really liked how this brings a new element to the room. It breaks things up, especially for an office space. This is really going to make the room not so bland and not so boring. So check out the tools we used specifically to create this project. We used a saw, miter saw. We had a nail gun. We used 18 gauge brad nails. We used sandpaper for all the joints. We had 220 grit sandpaper. We used caulking for all the seams. We used wood putty for all of the nail holes and any big gaps. We used a tape measure and a level. So level was pretty key in this to make sure that everything was lining up properly and everything was straight. We also obviously used paint. We did some rolling and paintbrush, but in the end we ended up spraying this. A pencil, don't be afraid to draw on the wall. So pro tip with this specific wall, don't be afraid to draw things out, visualize how you guys want this. In that preparation stage, it's actually even nice to even tape it out. You can tape out these specific shapes to make sure that's the sizing you want to go with and the angles. Laser level is nice as well. You could even do a chalk line if you want to go that route. Fourth is your finishing. So this is really key. There are a lot of joints on this wall. You're gonna want to make sure that you're caulking all your seams, and I usually use wood putty for all of my joints. So filling all of those holes up and then going back with a sander. Sometimes you even need to do 2 passes after you sand. So that's gonna make this really look from a shoddy job to craftsman, professional type look and feel. So spend the time on the finishing stage. Then lastly, painting. So some quick tips with painting. You wanna make sure you're masking everything off. That's key in any paint job, but have a ground cloth. You're always bound to drip, even though you think you might not drip, you're gonna drip. We have plenty of drips on our ground cloth. Make sure you're getting underneath some of those cracks and crevices. There's a lot of weird angles you're not typically painting when it comes to a normal wall. So spend the extra time getting in those seams. And then if you have the spray option, go with that. I think you get a little better finish rather than a paintbrush and a roller, but it all depends on what you have. You can definitely use a roller and a paintbrush. That's what we use on a lot of our walls.
All right, so I'm Matt, the one putting everything on the wall. So I'm just gonna give you a little rundown of what we're doing here on the saw, what the dimensions are, and what the angles are gonna be for each cut. So here's an example piece of what it's gonna look like halfway through cutting it. So we're gonna do a 30-degree cut from the center of each of these boards going out to the outside. You want to do that because when you have the hexagon joining up with another one, you'll want it to not look really weird, and you'll have it make this kind of a joint on the wall. That way everything will just look good and your eyes won't hurt after looking at it. So how we get that is we mark the center of each board, and then we line up our saw blade so that it'll cut only halfway through the board. And then we flip the board and cut it again, except on the other side. So what that'll look like here is I'm just kind of eyeballing it, trying to make sure the outside of the tooth, or the farthest point, or the point closest to the board, will only cut towards the middle mark instead of anywhere past it. So I'm just going to eyeball it, and it's of course maybe a good idea as you're starting off doing this to sneak up on the line rather than try to get your first cut dead in the center, because that can be really hard and it takes some practice to get to it. So with that, I'm just going to give this a little cut. Of course, I'm cutting 6 or so at a time so that I'm not here for more than the budget allows for. And here's what you're gonna want to look for is that little mark and then the end of the 30-degree cut right at the top of it. So then we just bring it to the other side and then flip your miter saw to the other 30-degree mark. You know, make sure to take some time to make it really right on that 30 degrees. So you only have to do this once. And of course, if you're cutting 100 or so of these at a time, you can do this side cut all 100 of them and then flip it and do 100 on the other side. Make sure all these guys are flush on the ends if you're doing multiple cuts at once. And then we just do our eyeball alignment. And there we go.
So we're running 2 wood grain profiles here. So we're running our 5-inch base and then a 268 lattice profile. That's gonna be essentially a 30-degree cut to join together to create that hexagon shape. So this is essentially repeated over and over. So that's the good news. There's a ton of cuts, but the fact that it is the same cut over and over makes it a little easier. So we are in the installation stage, trying to determine how we're gonna lay this up to get a consistent pattern. We laid our base up first, just the fact that we're gonna have a base and we know that that's gonna be built in, so we want to make sure that goes in first, and then we're actually gonna start in the ceiling, but this is kind of the top pattern, and then we'll have these come down and make the hexagons, but we wanted a starting point rather than just having the hexagons fade into the ceiling. The starting horizontal line to come in felt like it was gonna look a little cleaner, but baseboards in and we'll start on the wall now. We've got our initial start here, so we've cut these to be about 4 inches to kind of lead into it, so it doesn't just start with a hexagon at the ceiling. And then lining up your 2 pieces at the same time as you install is kind of the feedback we'd have to make sure that you're getting your angles properly put in. So come along, start at the ceiling, we'll do all the way across and then kind of work down from that. So this is gonna be interesting. This is definitely one of our most non-conventional accent walls, but excited to see how it turns out. We are done with the installation stage. We are on step 4, which is the finishing stage. So we have to do a little bit of work to complete this wall to get it ready for paint. So a few things we're gonna do. We're gonna use the patch and putty to fill all the gaps and all the nail holes. So definitely some imperfections, the fact that it's gonna be impossible to get perfect seams on every single joint. We have a lot of joints with this design, so using the patch and putty to fill all the gaps, all the nail holes, and then we're gonna use the caulking to fill all of our seams. So we have a wide number of seams here, so we're gonna use this throughout all these seams to fill it in and really make this look clean and finished. So take the time in this step. This step's gonna take a little bit of time, but in the long run, it's gonna get a beautiful result and you'll be able to see the craftsmanship for years to come. So a few things, tips and tricks. So with caulking, you want to make sure you cut your tube, your tip at a 45-degree angle to get an easier seam. The other thing I'd recommend is using some water and running along the seam. It'll help kind of clean up those lines and make sure that your seams are crisp and smooth. So now that we've filled all of our holes with our putty, we're gonna use our caulking. So we have our 45-degree angle on the tip, some water, some towels. It gets a little messy sometimes. And I'm just gonna start filling in all the seams here. So there's a lot of different tools you can use for applying caulking. Using the finger is one of the easiest and cheapest, so we're gonna go that route. So we're on to the final stage of the process of creating this beautiful accent wall. We've done our prep work and now it's time to paint. So with painting, it's all about the preparation in painting. This is gonna be actually a pretty quick wall. It's not a lot of square footage, but masking everything off is key. Determining where I want to paint. Do I want to paint the molding and the wall? Do I want to paint the molding in a different color, leave it white? I need to determine that, but the biggest thing, masking everything off, make sure you have some form of paper or cloth to catch the paint from the carpet. You don't want to ruin that. So I'm going to mask everything off real quick and then determine what color I want to use for the wall. So I have a number of different paints I'm going to try out to see what I like the best for this specific design. I'm going to be using brushes, foam brushes, and rollers. So really just the fact there's so many dimensions and curves and a lot of hard angles, I want to make sure I'm getting my foam brush underneath the trim so I'm not missing anything. On the larger surfaces, I'm doing my foam roller. And keep in mind, you can always spray. So if you're spraying, you just want to make sure you get underneath. I'm just kind of showing the most cost-effective way, but spraying definitely is a faster route. You probably get a little better finish as well. But we're going to be using these specific tools for painting. So let's see what color we like best. So I quickly threw some paint on the wall to see what I like the best. The yellow's a little bright. The blue's a good color. The other two are a little muddy, to be honest. I think it doesn't look as vibrant as I like with the contrast of the white walls. This is a sea blue. We used a semi-gloss finish to give more of a pop. We did a really good job and made sure that our painting was precise. So this wall is pretty intense in the fact that there's a lot of joints, there's a lot of cuts, but you can create a template. So once we determined our length of our specific molding, we were able to duplicate that and essentially create an assembly line and make that cut over and over, and that really speeded up the process. I will say this took us about 2.5 hours as far as the install. We had to make some cuts on the sides that were a little trickier, the fact that they weren't the standard size, and then you had the wall seam coming in, so you had to find out that angle and make those specific cuts. But besides that, it was pretty straightforward. We started at the top and worked our way down just so we could have some consistency and a template to work off to make sure that our lines were straight. So that's what I would recommend as well. You're welcome to start from the bottom as well, but we felt like people entering the room are gonna look higher on the wall rather than towards the bottom. So we are finished with this wall. We have plenty of other videos to check out. For all things molding and doors, check us out on YouTube at We Are Woodgrain, and thanks for following along, guys. Appreciate it.